There is such a would-be businessman. He is a Zergent collector and a lover of quoting Sunzi about and without Roman Alekhin. I have already done an issue about him once, when he collected money for the military, and eventually bought an orange Zikr for 6 million, despite the fact that before the full-scale invasion he was poor and lived in the same apartment with his mother. And even before that he was convicted of fraud. This grief-stricken thinker managed to visit the assistant governor of the Kursk region, who was eventually imprisoned, and serve in the Akhmat division. However, it was enough there only for 23 days. And now a video has appeared where he asks the businessman for a kickback and offers to spend his money as help to the fighters. But in fact to launder it. Directly, without hesitation, he says on a hidden camera that he will ask his friends from the 810th Marine Brigade to sign for medicines that they will not receive. Conditionally, let's say there are 810th Brigade there, now they are asking me. Including a cardiograph, there is something else there, yes, that is, there are no questions. That is, I will say to them, guys, well, this is my friend, who I am on good terms with them, but without names to Volatin. Yes. Can you say Sasha without any problems? It is necessary to eat this surname. No, I'm not. I'm actually going to tell him, well, look at this, I'm going to say this, there's a person who will just give money for it. But the task is such that everything works out for him with taxes, he needs you to sign official documents, therefore 1,000 nefupama. It was treated like this, moments will be written off within the framework. I do not know whether it is necessary to explain that this is a crime. There's a lot of hilarious stuff on this videos in general. Right under the camera, Alekhin agrees and accepts fewer and fewer shipments of goods than on paper and for a rollback. In short, an extravaganza. If you haven't seen it, look at the whole video in my Telegram channel, it just goes there for 6 minutes. In other words, Alekhin doesn't really have a chance of not sitting down. And given that someone filmed it all on a hidden camera, it is likely that Alekhin was already in operational development. They usually shoot like this. Alekhin's only chance is that it was words, not actions, but as you understand. Regardless of whether there is any landing, the reputation of a Sun Tzu lover is destroyed. Well, more precisely, I do not know what reputation is replaced by Zetnikov's there. The video is also hilarious because there Alekhin smokes a hookah right in some office and talks about his muddy schematics. Trying to impress the interlocutor, in short, absolutely blue. But this is a plot. We gathered with you not only and not so much to see how the next urgent collector was caught by the ass, but to look at the tiers of the Z channels. They now write that no one will donate to them and will not believe them, and that Alekhin framed all his colleagues. So maybe soon some Z-blogger Kirill Fedorov, who drives a Ferrari and tells subscribers that they need to save on coffee and throw 150 rubles to the fighters, will have to invent an excuse after the appearance of some other record. It is absolutely obvious that this is a big blow to the entire Russian Z-volunteer community. They themselves openly write about it. That now, as if those who are both grandmothers and not grandmothers, and businessmen will understand, that the money they donate to the Russian army goes to the personal wishes of these volunteers. For that, many thanks to the volunteers, and personally to Roman Alekhin. Yes, of course, it is better that he steals this money so that the Russian army receives less medicines and everything else. So a low bow to Roman Alekhin, as well as to the rest of the urgent collectors who simply steal this money. But if the money is not sent very urgently to the collectors, then it is quite good. Their fees have already fallen very much, they regularly complain about it. Well, now probably, even more cooling is waiting, as they say. Well, let's start, of course, with Alekhin's main media enemy, Vladimir Solovyev. He had been wetting him for a long time, but it still didn't work out, although Solovyev was able to remove Alekhin from Akhmat. And now, even without shouting, with the face of an absolute winner, he is dancing over the floating corpse of the enemy. And you know, this is how I'm seriously saying, because this is treason to the motherland. He did not just deceive the trust of our citizens, he betrayed the motherland. He is a traitor to the motherland. Moreover, such a simple question, and who does he work for? Moreover, he evidently felt that something was wrong, and tried to wash himself through the war. It didn't work out. The Ministry of Defense saw the bastard in time, and broke the contract with him. And he tried, apparently, in such a cunning way, he probably would have received military awards for himself. I didn't have time to fight the state. The schematic didn't work. It didn't work. Look at this one. This is what the face of an absolutely dishonest person looks like, who has made a fortune on people's misfortune and on people's trust. The main one also regularly subscribed, I have the honor. To jail. 0. We do not have the highest measure of social protection of execution. To jail. And, by the way, corrupt officials and thieves for money or not. The investigation will establish. The citizen defended. And by the way, Vladimir Rudolfovich does not trifle and immediately pulls Alekhin on treason. This is much more serious than fraud, and the terms there are incomparable. We'll see if it works out. Here Abdialudinov almost stood up for Alekhin, under whom he served as a type. However, his own reputation in the international community is very shaky. However, many began to recall that Akhmat actually made Alekhin a lot of his own awards, and therefore Aludinov got into a scandal. But his words did not particularly protect Alekhin. He just asked not to mix Akhmat into the case. Even if he had committed this crime, what should it have to do with me, or with the special forces Akhmat? One of you probably witnessed how he came straight here and said, "Here I have done something, Aptarana, please, here you are." And he reported to me. Of course, he also says there that it is necessary to wait for the decision of the authorities, and all that. But he doesn't fit in especially for Alekhin, rather he tries to distance himself as much as possible from a small-time crook. Well, then let's go on the Z-Telegram, there's a solid yummy. Let's start with Alex Parker. Some kind Russian people decided to make Roman Alekhin an offer that he would not be able to refuse. Having the honor happily took the bait and began to discuss the terms of the deal. That's how they earn on Orange Zikras, by the way, and he is also recorded on video. And after all, no one could have thought. Be kind, writes the Z channel. Let me just remind you, he adds, that Roman Alekhin, I emphasize, is a full cavalier of the highest award of Akhmat, the Order of Special Forces Akhmat, and in general all Akhmat awards, including the medals of the Aida Group, as well as a participant in the legendary Operation Podik. I hope they won't judge him harshly, they will understand and forgive him. And who is without sin? Laptev has a watch for $320,000 and nothing. The military commander Astrakhan writes, sit down and watch a video where a man similar to Roman Alekhin is engaged in a business similar to cutting humanitarian aid. I have so many jokes, he writes about this, that I don't know how to fit into the post. Do I understand correctly that this is the person who told us about the Donetsk Mafia? And now what about the Kersanj Duns who did not like Alekhin? By the way, if someone forgot, Alekhin, as a professional sociopsychologist and political scientist, suggested finally starting to build our Russian Orthodox National Socialism. I would have continued this list for a long time, but to hell with it, I have a question for all those patriots who so vividly promoted a respected man and a dear Orthodox brother, defending him from the attacks of this leftist with the wrong noses. How are they now? It turned out well, didn't it? The Z channel is ironic and spiteful. Did it work out well? Two Majors answer. Well, he writes a novel, you framed the entire volunteer movement with your video, and us personally. Whether you discussed it in order to hand over the author of the scheme to the police or actually admitted that you can start the law. For the sake of helping the front or personal gain, it does not matter. The very fact that you are discussing this topic with anyone and even allowing it in a dialogue under any sauce. This already means to bring up the topic of the front's volunteers. Do you think they didn't go to the other military bloggers? They approached and were harshly sent at the first hints. There is nothing to think about, merits separately, responsibility separately. And there is a way to wash away this shame. This time, only in a normal way, they hint at sending Alekhin to the front, only not to the clown troops of Apt Odinov, but to the real one. Anastasia Kasheverova, our beloved, also, of course, participated in the public company. I believe, she writes, that we need to wait for the intensive work of the security forces on volunteers, military bloggers. We have too much freedom, which hits both the state and the real assistance of the front. Here are two stories. Volshevsky knocked the cadman of one of the publics with the tax service and threw him interest on fees, as well as on income. And there's nothing to do. And similar things are waiting for the rest of the collectors, while this is the first precedent. Today, we were all shocked by the video with Roman Alekhin. Of a private or operational nature, it is unclear where the pieces of speech about some schemes with humanitarian aid were published. To understand the context, you need to listen to everything from and to. There are 2 points here. First, it is necessary to regulate volunteer activities. This is a huge amount of money that comes not only from philanthropists, patrons, businessmen, from ordinary people who donate their blood to the front. We need special accounts and a special register. This will ensure the transparency of fees, but also protect the volunteers themselves from tax charges. Also, those in the special register will be able to enjoy free travel and other benefits. And all this will close the possibility of murky schemes, Kasheverova hopes. Second, to tell the truth, you need to have not only balls of steel, but also a crystal biography that you yourself are clean and honest. I think that the special services are closely following many bright bloggers, military officers, volunteers, journalists, and are doing the right thing. I think they're watching me too. The question is, do you have skeletons in your closet or not? Telling the truth is a big responsibility. Not to say it and even more. But if you are trying to call someone to it, to find the truth, then be yourself smart, insightful, honest and sincere. We are waiting for comments from Roman and from law enforcement agencies. As far as I understand, Alekhin has not been detained. And the State Duma needs to hold hearings on the regulation of volunteer activity. Opacity, non-interference, provokes fraud. and undermines the trust in all volunteers, Kasheverova writes, and I fully support her in the context of Russia. The more bureaucracy, the more it will all be regulated, the more it will be under the security forces, organizations, the Ministry of Justice and so on, the better because, of course, under such conditions, not a penny will reach the front at all. Everything will be stolen along the way, everything will be regulated, it will be impossible to do anything there. To be honest, I don't understand this problem at all. Well, that is because, well, you know, probably, yes, I conduct training camps for Ukrainian soldiers at the APU. And I have a very simple rule in life, which, well, like to zero, reduces the risk of any kind of I do not know anything muddy money. I do not touch other people's money, that is, the brigades turn to me. I ask them for some documents that will confirm that these are real military with a real request and so on. And then they themselves, I ask them to create a collection themselves, make a monobank themselves, start a crypto wallet themselves, and so on, and I just publish their details and that's it, and the collection closes. They buy everything they consider necessary, what they requested, and then send me a report. That's it, there is no option that the money will go wrong somewhere. But no, here. Well, it is clear that when you want to buy a Zikr, this option does not suit you. But nevertheless, these stories are that either the state fucks its ass in a mop, or everyone will cheat, but it seems to me that this is quite a false story. But once again, I'm all for it with both hands. I am even about to support super in general, I can applaud, because the more the state regulates the volunteer Russian sphere, the less help there will be from volunteers, and it makes up a significant part of the necessary uniforms for the Russian military. So we will continue to wet the Russian volunteers. Kirill Fedorov writes, about Alekhin briefly and without lyrics. First, if everything is exactly as it is in the video, and it is extremely difficult to doubt this. This is from Alekhin's side, a setup of the entire community of volunteers, and thereby indirect assistance to Ukraine. Secondly, if there is real evidence, then the 159th article of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation fraud should be applicable to him, and applied to him, and to those who were connected with the scheme. Moreover, so that no one would have to repeat it, writes Fedorov. You know, it reminds me when you play Mafia. Well, here's a Mafia card game, yes, there's a Mafia commissar. And when residents start shooting one of the Mafias and the second Mafia, well, as usual we play when two Mafias start to drown together with them so that they don't think that she's a Mafia, that is. It seems to me here's a post Kirill Fedorov is about something similar. Well, okay, yes, I'm sorry for the good mood, but because, you know, I've been following Alekhin, the Z-bloggers for a long time. And, of course, a truck with gingerbread turned over on our street. Adequate Z writes, there can be no doubt that the exemplary representative of the military training camp Alekhin is a complete scumbag. No one who has followed his career even with half an eye. In this career, there were also pre-war convictions for fraud, and a screeching slope for mobilization, when I received a summons. And a Zyger that went to myriad mems, acquired for a small share of deferred fees and regular obgazovania of the command. Because without this exercise, as everyone knows, and the urgent collection turns out to be not the same. And a great many other things are just as smelly. A scumbag, however, is not a legal category, on the grounds that a certain person, in the opinion of even one of the first, is a scumbag, he cannot be subjected to criminal prosecution. That's for schemes of personal enrichment on humanitarian aid to the troops easily. It is these schemes that Alekhin discusses with great inspiration and no less knowledge of the case, on the frames that have dispersed today with a forest fire, most likely operational shooting. And this, if it has gone beyond conversations, has every chance of pulling on a full-fledged episode of a criminal case. And it's hard to imagine that this episode could be Alekhin's first and only one. The point here is only the persistence of the investigation. There is little doubt that there is a procedural action now. And separately, I imagine, or rather not. I can't even imagine with what force the legion of other active members of the military training camp is now sausage. Including those who are already bursting with noble indignation at the birthday boy. Alekhin's competitors for urgent fees and, very likely, users of the same schemes. Each of them, like no one else, knows how much they can present to him personally. Even if at the moment they do not delve into the topic of discrediting the army. Everyone who has a little sense understands at least a drop. That today he personally is right qualitatively closer to the beginning of his personal relations with the criminal law. Understands and shakes all the fat on his sides acquired in the war. And let them shake, this Nick is exhausted. Before moving on, I remind you that you can support this channel with your like, comment and subscription. All these actions help promote videos, especially for YouTube algorithms. Your subscriptions are important. And you can subscribe somewhere here. Well, you can also support the channel financially. You can do this on the Patreon, the link to which is in the description, and by buying an nVPN. This is a means to bypass locks, which allows you to bypass locks, use YouTube at normal speed, use Twitter, Instagram, call by Telegram and WhatsApp, go to the Discord to go to blocked resources, in short, use the internet normally. And not as Vladimir Putin allows you. You can buy on VPN by following the link in the description. Well, I also remind you that in Russia, it is still not prohibited from the point of view of the law to buy VPNs and use them. Well, we are moving on with you. Fighter-Bomb writes, if dipping the honor of the miller of all Russia into the toilet with shit is the last Chinese warning urgently by the collector from the state because the speeches of the entrepreneurs seem to hint, then the silence of the chamomile Kents is clear and understandable. It is quite likely, and even most likely, there is such a video or something similar on many urgent collectors. There is a spoiler. But in theory, the anti-crisis of accomplices in urgent fees with the messages of the volunteer movement is under attack. This is a setup of Ukrainians, this is a neural network, this is not what you thought. This is all the new experience of the author of Operation Stream. Alekina for president. So far, only 2 sergeants have been bombed, although I thought they would be the first to get drunk, because there is nowhere to put brands there. It's about 2 majors, obviously. Probably, it was left for the new year, so we will watch. But the most amazing thing is to see that even such soaps as Roma have a lot of admirers who at least look into their eyes. In short, all for popcorn, he writes. There was a wave of grief in the comments, he writes. Deceived. Who should I believe now? Who will carry our money? Yes, nothing has changed in principle, writes Fighter Boomer. As volunteers have worked, so they will work. As the people of the front helped, so they will help. As for citizens, so they will be. As glad as people were to believe crooks and crooks, so they will believe and be deceived. Nothing has changed. Alekina will continue to be carried and Sprat, and millions of other 100%. Only those with a gun began to fuss and panic. The rest just laughed with the kid who was going to success. The kid didn't know how many more of them there would be. Norin writes, Alyokin's incident should be properly publicly investigated. Such scandals cast a shadow over the entire volunteer movement, and this is no joke. This is a matter of supplying the entire army with what it needs. It's not just that a particular Kabin Kabinich puts $500,000 in his left pocket on each scheme, but that he destroys trust between volunteers, the army and society. And that's exactly where the prosecutor's office should come with a broom and a dog's head and separate the lambs from the goats. We are not pranksters entertainers, we are people's quartermasters, and thieves with scomatoses not only steal themselves, but also sabotage our work. Alexander Kardovic writes, fuck, of course, Alekin got into the fat, and judging by the presence of the video, it will end with feasts. Well, if he stole, then let him sit down, it's like there's no time for corporate solidarity. And so what happens to the fees, and they are largely discredited. And then someone else has enough brains to lay out their ingenious scheme for a video recording. Haha, writes Alexander Kardovic. Another Zetnik. Romanov Light is trying to somehow either stand up or not stand up for Alekin, according to Alekin, he writes. If a person has decided to muddy himself in the war, count on blood, his place is in prison or in the assaults. At the same time, when there was a batch in Kursk, I personally asked Alyokin, took it, and transferred it to the 155th battery on Mavic. And now the essence of the record is not R. If the full record is published, the essence will change dramatically. In short, merchants from Krasnodar came to offer help with schematosis in their favor. The purchase of medicine with their money from the suppliers they need, with the retention of part of the products in place of Alekin. It would be correct to publish the data of those who came. Why and in whose interests exactly such a muddy cut was made is an open question, Romanov writes mysteriously. Well, perhaps this is the only attempt to somehow protect Alyokin, but as you can see, it's quite a pity. Alexander the Cat writes on Alyokin. I remember a friend associated with the Kulibin enthusiasts handed me 2 portable drone suppressors from another direction to Kursk. You'll take it from Alyokin, he said. I gave him a whole batch, warned him about you. When I wrote to Alyokin about the suppressor, he replied that he had already distributed everything, and there was no more. But no, I thought, it means who needs it more. And it doesn't matter anymore whether there will be a criminal perspective on the grandfather or not, regardless of whether there was still the fact of fraud and official forgery, or it did not go further than negotiations in the office. But it was recorded on video. The head of the charity foundation agrees to a rollback as part of a scheme to help our fighters. However, Ru, who pretended to be a moral merchant of the humanitarian movement, denounced corrupt officials and tyrants. Wrote under each post, I have the honor, on the video agrees to go to forgery in order to earn money to help the front, and not to wash off from it. I hope that one person cannot cast a shadow on the entire volunteer humanitarian community, which has been voluntarily carrying this burden, primarily responsibility, for 3.5 years. After all, over the years I have met mostly sincere and decent people in this large family, and in it, as they say, not without a freak. The power of patience to the volunteer shop, wisdom and composure to the security forces, when you repeat the honor too often. You have to be a crystal clear person, otherwise the phrase acquires a figurative meaning, writes Alexander Kotz. Not, of course, the volunteer movement will be affected, and thank God, that's what CMUS is about. Jansen Z writes, it's kind of fucked up, especially Alyokin's justification. Well, yes, I was offered schematics for washing the left loot through the front and medicines. I agreed and started discussing which of the officers could be tightened up schematically, so what's the big deal? And most importantly, those who are outraged for these are those who are hawking it, non-state money. The fact that this under-received nefopam will be listed on the brigade's balance sheet, he does not care that, based on this very balance, requests will be made to replenish this very nefopam. And that the head of the medical service will either have to write off non-existent drugs by forgery, substituting himself for the article, or remain without actual baseball if there are 10 mults of property in warehouses. To its vile, low. This is some kind of. Alekhin must sit down. I'm sure there is something for that, even if nothing came to the point as a result of this particular recording. The roof of the Kursk bore forbade further development of the opera. He asks a question. Yuri Podolyak, one of the biggest Z-bloggers, writes on Alekhin, and not only. I watched the very video that everyone is discussing, and I will say a few words of my own. Regardless of whether there is a documented law enforcement corpus delicti or not, I consider the very fact of such negotiations, of a volunteer, shameful. And this stain will not be washed away by him, even if Roman manages to fight off prison. But, unfortunately, this casts a shadow not only on him, but on the whole volunteer movement, in which, unfortunately, there are different people, and always have been. I saw enough of this back in the 14th, 15th years, when everything was just beginning in the Donbass, and the first wave of volunteers was being formed. Everything happened there, and this was also enough. And then, going back to the video with Alekhin, I think that this is not the last such case. The reason for observing the volunteers of the first wave is that after the war, a lot of unsightly things will come out, and not only volunteering. It will come out in the army, in law enforcement agencies, and among the officialdom corps. A lot of things will come out, unfortunately, laments Yuri Podolyaka. Yana Poplavskaya. Little Red Riding Hood writes Death Live. It's suicide. Alekhin for 300 of us wounded the very heart of many of us. I couldn't believe the headlines at first, and then the video that I watched, and came to a daze. Naturally, at first I thought, and who is this stranger to me in these frames? After all, everyone knew him completely different. How many people have been ruined by greed? It's like a disease, some kind of madness. On this battlefield, during our own, we lose faith in the people we thought we knew. I sit and cry as if he was killed, but he killed himself, put his reputation at risk of others, and the family, a sick child. This is a knife straight into the soul of everyone who publicly defended him, and believed in his honesty. This is a huge number of people. And even worse, this whole story is called into question because of one Alekhin, but it gives rise to distrust of the work of funds, primarily in the eyes of people. A fisherman close to the Ministry of Defense. The Telegram channel writes trust into the pipe. The figure of Roman Alekhin has long caused controversy and is, to put it mildly, ambiguous, and now records appear where he, or a very similar person himself, calmly explains the scheme for laundering hundreds of millions of rubles through a charitable foundation without pressure. Such stories hit not only the defendants, they undermine the credibility of the entire volunteer community, regardless of the scale of activity, which for more than 3 years of the war has become the mainstay of the front in no uncertain terms. That is why the investigation must be public, tough, and fair. Some authorities in the past have already tried to get their hands on all humanitarian aid through official funds under state control, and with a mandatory entrance fee in the form of loyalty. There have been and will be such attempts, and the Alekhin scandal may become a convenient excuse for them to tighten the screws and tear everything down at the root. Volunteering in Russia is a living institution of civil society. These are not pranks, but the people's rear, as Norin aptly put it, the people's quartermaster corps. And if there is a work in it, this is not a reason to stigmatize everyone, but to carefully sort it out. We need a clear message: the guilty will be punished, the innocent will be protected. Without humanitarian aid, the situation at the front would have been many times more deplorable, if not directly catastrophic. Let's hope it will be like that. Let's hope that the fisherman is absolutely right, that the situation will really become catastrophic, because the fees will fall even more. And what choice do they actually have for these fees, if now, well, even a finished moron sees that all these terrible selectors just take this money to a thief? Andrei Medvedev writes, in the story of Alekhin Gate, the main thing is the loss of confidence in any training camps for the front. And this will certainly happen. Do you understand? People sometimes give the front the last, literally like the Jesus parable about the poor widow hermite. I rarely collect, you all know that. If I do, then to those whom I know personally, exactly what is at stake for the person who asks for support. But you remember that since the spring of the 22nd, like-minded people and I sometimes made collections on the walkie-talkie. In drone medicine, and for the first time in beer, we collected ghouls for the time being. Garage developments and crowdfunding pulled out the war. I will definitely never forget these signatures for transfers to drones or for the purchase of equipment for the front. Tiny transfers of 50 rubles, 100 rubles, 150 with a pension that I can. Our defenders have what they have. For our guys, there is no guy anymore. Beat the reptiles, Lyosha the 7th, So, from all over the vast country, translations of the simplest, not well-off people were translated. After all, when a person sends 187 rubles, he therefore has calculated how much he can send to tear himself away from his family. When the first ghouls flew to Abrams, I thought about how the whole country really stopped this enemy tank, taking into account the transfers that were handed over to us. And it worked because people believe in the army, in victory, in the country. And then some kind of Dina appears and starts spreading. We'll drink so many millions here, we'll divide it here, we'll write it off, and it's okay to go to the front. It's not the millions after all, but the fact that it was he who sawed people's trust and shoved them into their pockets. And the lives of soldiers there as well. What can I say? There are no words. Is Fedorov right? Here, rather, the numbers suggest 159.4, meaning the article for fraud. I hope that all of them will be put in jail, all of them should be judged, everyone who is in this video. From Solovyev to Medvedev, and indeed anyone. It's all the rot of the earth, It's all the scum who support the fascist occupation army. Therefore, the fact that they are fighting with each other is wonderful. The fact that they steal money from fees is wonderful. I support the theft of money from fees, and when they are caught by the ass. Because then the rest see that there is no sense in donating to Russian urgently collectors. This money is still being stolen. In short, it's great that this has happened. Alyokin of a comfortable prison cell for everyone else, in principle, will also never donate to the Russian army. Because even if you are a scumbag who wants to support the fascist auction army, you know, your money will be stolen. Well, if you still decided to donate, then I suggest donating through Kirill Fedorov. Because something tells me that there is not a penny to the front. And thank him very much for that. Well, Michael Nucky was with you and see you soon. Have a nice day. Bye.